This is a very quiet and beautiful part of Clipston Quarter. This little pathway here is lined with some of the best ancient oaks in Sherwood Forest. These trees have now been haloed around, which has altered the microclimate, and the beetle I'm looking for today, I think, has a particular preference for a very warm, sheltered and windless climate. The haloing may well have changed that, and the beetle that I'm looking for, Cryptocephalus querceti, may no longer be found here, but it hasn't been seen here since 11 years ago, when Dillis and I did find it on a couple of the trees that we're going to look at shortly. But in the intervening years since then, and despite many searches, we've failed to find it, and I've looked in the last few years, still not been able to find it. It does have a fondness, apparently, for epicormic growth, which I'll show you during the video at some time, but that's the young growth that comes out from large sort of clumps that form on the trunks. Although Dillis himself didn't find the beetle on such growth. Instead, we found it sat on the leaves on the end of lower branches, and we used a simple enough technique to find them. We just stood underneath and looked for the characteristic Cryptocephalus silhouette. What a beautiful day it is. It's sheltered here. There's quite a cool north or northerly breeze. Here, it's lovely. Now, I've just been checking, looking for the Cryptocephalus querceti silhouette from underneath these young oaks. We did have a couple of specimens on young oaks similar to this one, but further along that part of the path, which we'll visit later in this video. But nothing as yet. I've no idea whether the beetle is still here, or even if it's actually out yet. Cryptocephalus coralli is certainly out yet, but no idea on Cryptocephalus querceti, which over the last few years has proved much harder to locate than the bright red Cryptocephalus coralli. Matters are made a little bit more difficult here by the fact that there are two Cryptocephalus that are extremely similar. The other one is Cryptocephalus labiatus. Now, the two are, I say, very similar, that can be distinguished by the punctuation on the elytra. In Cryptocephalus querceti, that punctuation is incredibly fine and quite sharp, whereas it's more sort of obtuse and difficult to discern on labiatus. Cryptocephalus labiatus prefers silver birch, of which obviously there's lots here, and that was also been found further along that path. But labiatus will use a number of trees, so even if we do find a small black Cryptocephalus, it's not forced to be querceti. Now, the technique I use is one of being very careful on approach, and when I do handle the lower branches, try and handle them in a smooth motion. Don't grab and yank them down. Oak leaves are very smooth, and beetles, especially Cryptocephalus beetles, will drop off quite easily, but also can't grip very well. And in breezy conditions, the beetles aren't even forced to be on the leaves, but may well be clinging to the stems. That's something that we certainly saw with Cryptocephalus coralli on a number of occasions when we surveyed for coralli and it was very breezy or often rainy. Then we could sometimes find the adult beetles clinging, literally clinging. So you'd put your arms around a telegraph pole and they'll stay like that until the breeze had died down. Thankfully though, it's not too breezy here. What we'll do, we'll head down this way to the first of the trees where we had querceti in 2012. Well, there's nothing on these lower branches. One of the big problems is you get a lot of small black flies sitting underneath the leaves, and at first glance they can appear quite Cryptocephalus-like. Well, there's been a lot of searching and no querceti. It's no surprise. They're not forced to be out yet, not forced to be here. We may have lost them from this part of the forest. It's just a case of keep searching, keep doing this. It's other than using a beating tray, this is the best method we always found in locating adult querceti, by standing underneath these oaks and looking up for that small but distinctive silhouette. It might sound daft, but from underneath, apart from the characteristic Cryptocephalus shape, the placement of the feet also shows through the underside, and that's a big giveaway. It might not sound it for a 3mm long beetle, but it is. Now, a few years ago, just further past in an area where we've been, or were close to at the beginning of this video, I pulled back some loose bark on one of the ancients, rather like this one. I was amazed to find in amongst the accumulation of various bits of spiders' webs and leaves and old acorns dating back tens of years, I found a larval pot of Cryptocephalus querceti. I have heard it said or read somewhere that querceti do spend most of their lives in recesses and the centre of ancient oaks such as this, but Dillis and I always thought that it was more wider than that, and that in much the same way as Cryptocephalus coralli, females will sit openly on a leaf anywhere on the tree and they will just drop their eggs. And certainly when we reared Cryptocephalus querceti in captivity, we found that there was no special circumstances or site that Cryptocephalus querceti females needed in which to deposit an egg surrounded by the female's feces and in its very own first pot. But they could be anywhere. I don't think for 1 minute they are confined to the hollows of ancient oaks. Maybe around the base they could be, but I think they're found more widely in amongst the leaf litter layer than that, which means that the beetles can appear anywhere in the vegetation. We don't have much vegetation here because these ancients, these three, have been haloed over the course of the winter, so there's not going to be a deal of vegetation grow here. Ultimately it will be bracken and bramble, typical Sherwood Forest fare. So finding the larval pot of Cryptocephalus querceti is a very difficult and impossible proposition. Now, tucked away deep in the recesses, so to speak, of Clipsonal Quarter and indeed Blackpool Plantation, which we're starting to border onto now, are some truly magnificent oaks. They're off the main pathway which we've been walking down, and even further away from the more popular paths of this part of Sherwood Forest. And this has to be one of the most superb trees here. It's a real gem. And this lower branch here has lots of young growth coming off it. It's very sheltered. Of course, it's been haloed to within about 5 metres of this ancient oak's crown. May just prove to be ideal sunny warm habitat which Cryptocephalus querceti requires. Now, while the sun's gone behind a cloud, no doubt it'll be out again shortly, it makes for better lighting, but this is epicormic growth, all these little clumps of buds. Now, normally on the branches of oaks and on some other trees, underneath the bark there are buds. They're not usually visible from the surface until they start to break out, and these have done, and they break out and burst and start to grow, usually as a result of stress on the tree. The tree may have lost a branch, or part of the branch may have snapped or been cut off, and so this epicormic growth will start to grow. Now, on the trunk in the background there's several bits of epicormic growth. That's old epicormic growth, and it's really sort of chunky and almost sort of ball-like. That's old epicormic growth, a century or more old. Because usually with a lot of epicormic growth it does this, it just dies off. It grows for a little bit, leaves, and then stops producing leaves and dies off. And occasionally a few branches, maybe this one, will be successful and will grow. And there's lots of this growth all over this particular one branch, and that's the kind of growth on which they say that querceti favours. But Dillis and I have never found it on such growth, whether it's epicormic growth growing on a branch like this or on the trunk of an ancient. Here's another quite a magnificent oak in its own way. I call this the elf tree. It just reminds me of an elf's hat, that's all. Hard to imagine that with so little left of it, that this tree can still grow. Yet there's that one branch, look, which is worth checking because it's in a nice sheltered location, good quality foliage, which is another thing which Cryptocephalus beetles are attracted to, especially the likes of coralli. It's good quality of foliage. So the same will be applicable to querceti. It's just a marvellous tree though. It's fascinating. There's nothing left of it on the other side. I'll show you the other side. See what I mean? It's quite incredible how that tree is still living. It's just amazing, because most of the bark on the side that we've just been looking at is loose and off the tree and doing nothing. The bark is dead over a part of it, and yet it still clings on to life. But it looks as though it's been hit by a missile. Quite incredible. Several hundred years ago, this would have been a magnificent ancient oak. Even in them days, they'd have classed it as ancient, but it's stunning in its own way. Now, that old oak there is important in terms of Cryptocephalus querceti, and it's featured on a recent video. It's unfortunately dying now. It's declined greatly in the last 5-10 years, but that was the tree, the bottom branch that you can see that's in leaf, that was the tree that first provided us with a record of Cryptocephalus querceti. We were sheltering under that during some heavy rain, and it was whilst sheltering I looked up and saw the silhouette of this Cryptocephalus, and it did turn out to be querceti. But it's unlikely to have another one on. It never has had another one on since. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to work my way back up to the area where we started this survey today. I have gone right round by the Black Pool and come down into Clipston Quarter here. So now I'm working my way back up to the original start point, but no sign of querceti at all today. Well, if you wanted to know what that was, and it does, you can feel the shockwave going through the ground. It sounds like the blowing up old explosives that have been found on Sherwood Forest, which is about half a mile or a mile away. There's been 3 of them. That's the 3rd one of those today. It really is a bang like no other, and you can feel it coming and going underneath you through the ground. But no sign of querceti today. The technique and survey method I'm using may seem to some professional surveyors to be quite time consuming, shall we say. They might be inclined to get out the beating tray and start whacking the foliage and using a vacuum sampler to sample everything that's crawling around on the foliage of these oaks, but it's not how I operate, and it's a far nicer way to survey, and it's looking up for the silhouette of any querceti or any insect. It's a very good way, surprisingly, of finding anything. This isn't one of those beetles that you can go in like a bull in a china shop to find. My kind of beetle.